One of the things I think it's important to remember, because Byron Donalds did some babbling debate with the amazing Louisiana, should have been Senator Gary Chambers. Can we make this clear, Keith? I need people to say black folks used to vote Republican. We have never voted conservative in large numbers. When you think about Reconstruction, when you think about the early 1900s, there was no immigration debate. There was no gun debate. There was no LGBT debate. Conservatism back then meant states' rights, and it meant being anti-civil rights, and maybe allegedly fiscally conservative. But regardless of the R or the D, we never voted conservative because the conservative movement was aimed at us. If you look at some of those newspapers in the mid 19th century, the conservative newspapers were the pro-slavery newspapers, the New York World and so on. So y'all use Republican and Democrat and conservative and progressive interchangeably. Black folks have always been the first progressives, have always pushed this country, always. And so the idea that we were once upon a time conservative is just not true.
Well, I agree with you, obviously, but I also think, we've talked about this splitting hairs before, I think, but I also think that Black people have historically been politically progressive, but socially conservative. And by that, I mean, yes, in every election, Black people have voted for every election we've been able to vote. Black people voted for who we believe to be the most progressive candidate, the candidate who is most likely to help our interest, and not necessarily just our interest, but those are the people we voted for. The reason why Black people left the Republican Party started in 1928 and 1932, as you know, is because of the fact that FDR offered a
FDR.
New Deal that's going to help people, and
But wait, Keith, hold on one second. I know what you're going to say, but I want to push back on this. That we've always voted, we've been socially conservative, but politically progressive. But what it meant to be conservative back then was different, right? So what it meant to be conservative back then in Reconstruction, 1870s, 1880s, 1910s, 1920s, we were completely progressive. Like conservative. Everybody was religious. Everybody was churchy. Like the what it means to be conservative. I would say maybe starting in the 70s or the 80s. That's when the conservatism really, progressive really changed and it became something else. But everybody was against same-sex marriage, right? So I can't think of, Ida B. Wells was not a conservative. Harriet Tubman, died in 1905, was not a conservative. Frederick Douglass was not a conservative. Jackie Robinson, even though he was Republican, was not a conservative. So what it meant to be conservative back then was so much different, and we were the ire of conservative movements.
Well, yeah, I 100% agree with you. Although I guess what I'm saying, again, we're splitting hairs, is that when I speak of social conservatism, I mean about a certain type of respectability politics in the Black community. You mentioned sort of the church-going preachiness in the Black community. I think that's always existed, at least in my lifetime, it's existed, even for people who would support Democratic candidates religiously. But we've all, I remember going to Black churches and civil rights events back in the 80s and hearing Black preachers, talk.
Yeah, no, that's when it changed.
The same message about, you need to wear your skirt longer, and you need to
right.
To act the right way. This whole respectability politics, and somehow that's going to give us freedom, liberation.
But they're talking about when we once voted Republican. And what I'm pointing out, when we did that, we were not conservatives. That's what I'm saying.
Well, we were never conservatives in the sense that conservatives have ever been defined. But I'm just making that tiny little point. Again, I don't know that we're disagreeing, we're just splitting hairs. I'm just making that tiny little point that on social issues, in terms of the way we see the family and things like that, Black people have always there's always been a strong strain of conservatism, and part of the reason why this is the reason I first started writing my books back in the 1990s, talking about LGBTQIA rights. One of the first examples of that was the issue of gay rights, where Black people universally were more supportive of gay rights than white people were. And that's not something that's very well known. But Black people were also more opposed to gay marriage than white people were. It's like, how do
Right.
you reconcile that? How are we so homophobic in terms of gay marriage, but so homotolerant when it comes to gay rights? Because when we talk about political issues or equality issues, black people for the most part, will be supportive. But when it comes to what we consider to be family or religious and moral issues, we tend to be more conservative. That's the only point I was trying to make. And that's something that Republicans tried to exploit in 2004 when gay marriage became an issue because Massachusetts had legalized it in that state. They tried to drive a wedge between black voters and Democrats to say, well, the Democrats are going to get gay marriage. And it wasn't effective, but ultimately John
The
Kerry lost that election. So
the definitions of conservative and progressive changes in the 1960s, 1970s, when you have women getting in the workforce, women being allowed to get a credit card without, being married, when you have the Stonewall uprising, when you have after suburbia has been built, this idea of of black capitalism, these words really began to evolve and change and grow. And I just want to remind people, when Byron Donalds or Tim Scott or Clarence Thomas says we were once conservative, it's just not true.
yeah.
That's just not because we were the target. That's why I get sad at us, the ones who are conservative today. I realize you understand, once upon a time, we were the immigrants and the trans folks and, all this kind of stuff. It was all about us. I mean, when they talk about the Plessy versus Ferguson ruling, right? What is that, 1896? They say it was a conservative court. A conservative court. Like, that's what being liberal back then meant, being pro civil rights and being anti states' rights. So I just want to remind people that don't get caught up in that okey doke they spit. Jim Crow was a conservative movement. It was conservatism. Because their line was, we believe in states' rights. We shouldn't expand the government to give special privileges to Negroes, right? So that's what I'm saying. But close it out, then we'll go to a break.
Well, yeah, and I think this is, maybe it's just a semantic issue, but I agree with everything you said. And so the only issue for me is, why are black people who consider themselves pro-black co-signing on this nonsense? Why are
Because they
black
don't
people
know our history.
I'm talking about the hoteps out there, the people who do know
Oh,
the history, who are purposely exploiting this information. I'm not talking about the Janet Jacksons who don't vote and don't know anything because they're Jehovah's Witnesses. I'm talking about the people who know the truth, who claim to be pro-black, who claim to be pro-reparations, claim to be black power, fist in the air, but they are doing everything they can to help elect Donald Trump by denigrating Kamala Harris. And that's the undertone of that is that the misogynoir, the idea that we have this black woman, this talented, competent black woman who is fighting for us, but they don't want to be second fiddle to her.